once you start talking about ethical issues in technology, there's some related issues that may not be strictly related to them, but need to be discussed. They need to be concerned. And one of them is the design of the technology. Because most people don't know what's going on under the hood of the software. To them, what's called the graphical user interface that they see on the screen in front of them that they click with their mouse is the technology, even though those who build it know there's a lot more complex systems going on that may not be clear or transparent to the user. But to the user, the design is what they see as the technology. And now that you've taken this course, you should have a better idea of what's going on under the hood and have a better guess. But not everybody does. So how, if let's say you're building tools or you're working in a company that's deciding to use language technology tools, how do you consider these issues? Or if you get into this field of human-computer interaction, which is very open to people, for example, in social sciences, in technology, and computer scientists tend not to be as good at this. It takes a different set of skills. I've seen that in my job. Then if you're in that field, how do you use your knowledge to think about what are the ethical issues that may not be obvious to other people? Are people being misled about how much the computer understands, right? A lot of people think of, I think, large language models like ChatGPT as magical, or artificial intelligence, right? Which is one of the myths we dispelled early on in this semester, that artificial intelligence isn't really artificial. It's about numbers and wires, and it's not really intelligence if you look at it and think of it broadly. It's statistical models, and that's a bit different than what we talk about with human intelligence. But what do other people understand it as? And how do you design the model, and how's the model designed? Is it misleading people? So we can go back to ELIZA and think about their view, even knowing better, how quickly they came to view it as something they could share private conversations with, or the tendency for humans to get emotionally attached to technology. We know that human face-to-face interaction is vital, even more so in this day and age of remote Zoom and social media. We also know that people do develop specific relationships or emotional attachment with non-human, non-animate objects. If you want to think about linguistically, the tradition of calling ships and sometimes cars she comes from this acknowledgement that people do form emotional attachments, almost like personal relationships, with things that are not personal. And that's going to happen with any technology, more so if it's using language. So how do people understand it? Are they being misled to understand it? What do we need to explain to help them use it better? So some people thought of ELIZA as a diary. That's how they talked about it, these people who were getting attached to it, as a way to privately explore their own thoughts. So it wasn't necessarily so much that they were being led to believe that it was an actual person or an actual intelligent machine, but the way they used it was affected by the fact that it used language. And how you design a model can further enhance that or help people understand to control it and not get unhealthfully attached emotionally to something that's not going to be able to return that emotional attachment. Ethical. The issue of ethical design goes way back. Perhaps not too surprisingly back to almost to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right, which began around 1776, at least in the United States, and it was in full swing by the early 1800s, which is when Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley. And I don't know if you've read the story. Most people, I think, have a slight misunderstanding of the actual story, but the story here was not so much of a monster going around, but this doctor created this Frankenstein. Sorry. That's also a common misunderstanding. It was the doctor named Frankenstein who created this being who was unique. It had agency, it was personal, but the issue at the end of the book that comes up is the doctor didn't consider the ethical and humanistic concerns specifically the monster didn't have a partner. It was all alone in the world. So that's a great little story to think about. These ethical designs of machinery has to go, and technology isn't just about does it work. How could the system abuse the users, give bad advice, just in and of itself, or based on how we know users do interact with technology? All of those questions have to come up. Could it particularly with statistical models which don't really handle outliers, and yet outliers are important, could it become something that marginalizes people or marginalizes opinions or marginalizes language, ideas, concepts, anything that can be expressed and communicated through language that's already an outlier perhaps, but perhaps shouldn't be an outlier? What's the issues here? How do we overcome them? And then of course privacy. Do they leak information? Is that sensitive information? Is the information originally public? Not everything is automatically public. No answers to these questions. Questions that you have to consider as you go into your profession. You will be using language technology, and you will be making decisions about who uses it and which ones you choose to use, perhaps for a whole company. And then the whole field of computer interaction and user experience design, which is a whole field which is kind of that beautiful marriage of social sciences and computer science. And I think it's becoming more and more important because there's so much technology out there that is not very different from each other. When I was a kid, every time a new Microsoft Office came out, it was markedly better and different than previous. But at some point, it's kind of gotten maxed out as far as usefulness. So now it's like, what's usable? So that's the user design. So is the tool that you're deciding to use or the tool you're designing, has it studied the users and how they interact with technology? Has it taken that into consideration? Has it taken those ethical questions? Has it taken the time to do a study beforehand, like the Wizard of Oz, where you simulate what the technology would do with a human to test how they interact before you go and spend all that money to build it? Simple things that often get skipped over that can have huge impact. Safety concerns, of course, using chatbots for mental health. What about things like if you build a conversational agent that you can use to get directions or talk to in the car? Is it taking into consideration the fact that you might be distracted and you need to be distracted? So sometimes when I'm talking to my phone for it to play music or get directions and I'm driving, I need to pause to pay attention to what's going on the road. But then at the same time, I've noticed that I feel very pressured and stressed because I don't want the tasks that I'm in the middle of with the phone getting lost and having to start over, especially if I'm looking for directions right now because I'm lost and I need those directions and I can't stop to get them by hand. Has anyone designed a conversational agent that is built for conversations in the car and recognizes that conversations in the car would be different and need to be different for safety concerns? I don't know. Maybe you should build them. These are just a couple of things that need to be taken into consideration, that could be taken into consideration. You could think of many more. So it's much more than just, does it handle language? But sometimes, how does language used in a particular context, such as driving, affects how it's going to be used or how users interact with them, which could affect their safety, so then that should affect their design. What else could it be? Here's an example of how badly, you've probably heard stories like this if you haven't heard this one, but there was the case of Microsoft Tay, which was an experimental Twitter bot that was released in 2016. This was before before ChatGPT. So this was something, to have something that could actually create conversation. And it was programmed to have a personality of an 18 to 24-year-old American woman, and just to share fun little things like horoscopes or tell jokes, ask people to send selfies. It was programmed to use informal language, slang, emojis, and send gifts. Just a fun thing, right? Just a fun little thing that you could interact with, no particular agenda. And it was also designed to learn from the data given by users. It was released, and almost immediately, without any programming, because it was a machine learning model that was learning from the data it was given, it turned offensive and abusive. It started, instead of just fun little stuff, it was using obscene and inflammatory tweets, including Nazi propaganda, conspiracy theories. It began harassing women online. This was so bad that Microsoft had to take it down after just 16 hours of release. They had not apparently taken into consideration all these design questions and the human-computer interaction, and then the human interaction that happens online, which is different than face-to-face and unfortunately tends to be a bit less nice. So design of your product and consideration of human-computer interaction relates to ethical issues and even just whether you get money off your product, because if it's not usable or if it turns bad, it's going to fail. So we raised a lot of questions that relate to ethics, design, data privacy. What are the solutions? Well, I said at the beginning in the first video that we don't have a solution. I have more questions. And these aren't something that you need hard and fast rules because it's context independence. So instead, the solution here is to ask questions. Or simply, another way to put it, don't stay ignorant. If you want a solution, go look for the answer and constantly be looking for the answer to the questions and knowing the questions you should ask. That in itself requires a whole education. So I'm going to give you some questions to ask. One is, what are the best practices that already exist that other people through hard experience have figured out for this process or product or technology? Are there best practices, ethical and design practices? What are the social impacts that we can achieve or that we should achieve, either as a main focus, but then also the things that are not a main focus of our product, but are maybe byproducts. And these are the ethical considerations that come up that we also need to think about. How can we fix, prevent, mitigate any of the issues that we have identified or others have identified that do come up with such technology? What can we do now to address them? Is it possible to address them or to mitigate them? Do we have an ethical review in our company? If you're an entrepreneur, have you set up an ethical review board for tech products that you are producing? And what is their role? What is their policy? What is their power and limitation? Are you getting good balance and good checks and balances on what you're doing? How do you keep your users or your public appropriately informed? Not all of them know as much as you do about language technology. They haven't taken this class. So how do you communicate what it can and can't do? And other questions I'm sure you could come up with. Another solution is to explore and take responsibility for what you're doing. Whose job is this to address harm or benefit? Do we have somebody assigned? What are my responsibilities in whatever role? Sure, maybe I didn't develop. I might not be a technology developer. Maybe I'm only a consumer, but don't I still possibly have some responsibility? I'm an educated consumer. I have that privilege of higher education. So what are my responsibilities to use the knowledge I have? Or if you work for government, or a school, or anything, or just as a member of a republic and a democracy where we are governing ourselves, what is my role to give information to others using the information and the privilege I have? And there's some ground rules, right? We talk about ethics is do no harm. How do you do that? Well, some ground rules, not hard or fast, but just rule kind of, just places to start. Stay engaged with the issues and challenges, right? You guys worked on an essay all semester. Don't let it be the last time you ever ask yourself, what is a current issue in language technology, and what are the solutions or the challenges or the opinions and the reactions that exist towards it? Stay on top of that. Keep reading. Keep communicating with people who know more than you do or less than you do as someone who can give and take information and learn and teach. And be okay with this vagueness in these areas. It's okay. Don't run away from it because it seems that there lacks a clear answer. Listen, listen, listen. Always be ready to learn, and listen with the intent to learn, not to give your knowledge all the time. And that's just generally a good rule for relationships and anything in life. Maintain trust. If you have a place of responsibility or power, maintain trust with the people that are going to interact with the things that you're producing or who are looking to you to take leadership or to take action. Be a trustworthy person. Start there. And keep asking questions. Have I mentioned this again? Keep asking questions.